up the end of 2017?
It's an honor to have you at the course.
The president hosting the Coast Guard at his golf club near Mar-a-Lago. It's where a day earlier, for the first time, he explicitly acknowledged he's been soft on China on trade in that impromptu interview with the New York Times. His administration hoping Beijing will pressure North Korea to end its nuclear weapons program. Now, new concerns China's actually helping the rogue regime and violating UN sanctions. These U.S. Treasury satellite images show what South Korea suspects is a Chinese ship transferring oil to a North Korean ship in international waters. The Chinese today strongly denying the government was involved. Hours after this accusation from the president, quote, "Oil is going into North Korea, so I'm not happy about it." The 30-minute interview shattered what had been the relative quiet of the president's working holiday as he decried the Russia investigation, but not the man overseeing it, Robert Mueller. "I think that he's going to be fair," the president said. That's different from the questions of credibility some other Republicans have raised. Chris Ruddy, the president's friend, joined him for part of that interview.
Have you seen in the last week, couple of weeks, a change in tone when it comes to the special counsel Russia investigation?
I think he's always had a lot of respect for Mueller as an individual.
He not once, not twice, but 16 times insisted there was no collusion between his campaign and Russia and doesn't want the investigation to drag on. The quicker it ends, he says, the better it is for the country.
And the president appears to be feeling characteristically confident about his grasp of policy, saying he understands the big bills in Congress better than any president who's ever been in office and knows the details of taxes better than the greatest CPA.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.
The North Korea dilemma is getting even more complicated for President Trump. Now it looks like both Russia and China have been secretly shipping oil to North Korea in violation of the United Nations sanctions. We told you last night how a U.S. spy satellite photos apparently show Chinese ships transferring oil to North Korean ships at sea. Now, two senior European security sources tell Reuters that the Russians have been doing the same thing. Let's discuss what this means with Fox News contributor and political science professor Kyron Skinner in San Francisco. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. This is a very difficult situation. I mean, on one hand, you had a very impressive vote in the United Nations, only now to have evidence that both Russia and China are violating these same sanctions. What would you recommend to the president?
What's actually happening here is that global leadership is being devolved to the United States, and because the Russians and Chinese are not living up to United Nations Security Council resolutions, especially the one in September, they're violating international law and international norms, and I would suggest that the President of the United States make it absolutely clear that if the governments in Russia and China do not penalize and stop those shipping companies that are trading oil with the North Koreans, that the United States has to begin to look at military options, and that underscore the fact that the United States is actually going to become the leader of resolving the North Korean conflict within Northeast Asia and beyond. And that's not something I think the Russians and the Chinese want to happen.
Now, to add the clarity that you're seeking, a military option against China and Russia is probably not viable, but they can do some things, for instance, such as a naval blockade. Is that what you mean by saying taking action and military action?
I'm not really suggesting military action because I know that the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense do not want to go down that path. They've been working overtime on the diplomatic front, but we have to let our strategic adversaries in the North Korea issue understand that the full range of options have to be on the table. We will continue to use diplomacy aggressively, but they have to know that if they make North Korea much more of an unstable regime by propping it up, it serves no good interest for them as well. I don't think they quite understand it yet.
Now, the president has tried to channel Ronald Reagan in his whole peace through strength approach. Is the United Nations as worthless as it seems from at least my vantage point?
I wouldn't say it's worthless. It is a huge debating society where often in the General Assembly, the United States is the target. But the fact that we got unanimous votes in the United Nations suggests that the international community is moving in the direction of what the United States has been saying all along, especially under President Trump, that North Korea has to be a denuclearized country because it is so particularly dangerous. It could be the site of nuclear proliferation throughout Northeast Asia, indeed the Indo-Pacific region. And so I think what it can do for the United States now, under the America First policy of the president, is help reinforce the issues that America First and principled realism, a pillar of the president's policy, suggests is that sovereignty matters, that respecting international norms and laws, they matter as well. And so in that way, the UN does play a useful role.
My own personal take on this is that more sanctions isn't going to work because the leader of North Korea really doesn't care about his people. But last question for you real quick. The idea of a naval blockade to prohibit the importation of things that are needed and critical in North Korea, do you believe that is one of the viable things sitting on the president's desk?
I think it's being debated in the Pentagon and in the national security community. Whether it's on the president's desk, I don't know. But let me just speak to your pessimism on UN Security Council resolutions. They do work when there is compliance. And if given the strict nature of the most recent December resolution against North Korea in the Security Council, if indeed it's implemented fully, it has a punishing impact on the North Korean economy. The Russians and Chinese, if they don't comply, they are undermining something that could really bring North Korea to the negotiating table.
Well, and I hope that President Trump continues to show the world how the Russians and the Chinese evidently are not complying with something that they were supportive of not too long ago. Professor, we wish you the happiest of holidays and a happy new year. And thank you again for joining us.
New warnings for North Korea and China ahead of the new year. Defense Secretary General James Mattis telling North Korea get ready for some more pressure. And President Trump slamming China for not doing enough to help. This all coming as South Korea claims it seized a ship that delivered oil to North Korea. Joining me right now is author Gordon Chang, an expert on China. And it's good to see you. This keeps bubbling up. Now we know that, the Chinese aren't paying the kind of attention that they need to the sanctions. You predicted this might happen. Where do we go from here?
Well, President Trump created a showdown yesterday with his tweet. It's really good that you have an American leader calling out the Chinese for busting sanctions, doing that in public and doing that in strong terms. But the point right now is the Chinese are going to say that's just empty rhetoric unless he actually goes ahead and does something. Because his tweet yesterday was very much like his June 20 tweet, where he expressed disappointment with the Chinese. And right after that, he took 5 actions that imposed small costs on Beijing. He did that as a signal to tell the Chinese, look, you got to come to the party. Now that he's actually signaled that, he did that in June, we now got to actually do something because he has caught the Chinese red-handed, and really there's no more room, I think, for giving them any more choices, any more chances.
When we talk about do something, I mean, there are different levels of doing something. I had an exchange that got a little fiery with Ambassador Bolton, my friend John Bolton, there yesterday. He thinks we need to be moving towards a military option. My concern is, hey, we may need to get there at some point, Gordon, but I think there's a lot we can do in between now and then. And I'm not talking just sanctions. I'm talking sanctions on steroids.
Right. Well, we've talked about, for instance, declaring Chinese banks primary money laundering concerns, disconnecting them from the global system. But also, we have this Section 301 trade investigation of China stealing intellectual property. There's a Section 232 investigation on steel and aluminum. The Chinese economy right now is fragile. They've accumulated a lot of debt in order to avoid a downturn in 2008. They've got a debt to GDP ratio, which is somewhere between, I think, 350% and 425%. That's stratospheric territory. You can't get any higher than that. And so right now, the U.S., if it wanted to, could push China over the edge. Now, we don't want to do that for certain reasons. But as you say, a trade war is a lot better than a real war.
Well, that's what I say. Ambassador Bolton said, look, Trish, you really think that corporate America is going to go along with that? And gosh darn it, they may just have to, right?
Well,
and wouldn't that be a better alternative than an actual war where you are losing American lives?
In August, Beijing signaled that if the United States struck North Korea first, that it would come in on North Korea's side, which means, yeah, if you strike North Korea, and I think we have to have an honest conversation with the American people, as Ambassador Bolton has said, that honest conversation has to take into account that we could end up in a war, not only with North Korea, but with its big power sponsors, China and maybe even Russia. So I'm not saying World War III is the end result, but I'm saying it is a possibility because the Chinese have already told us that.
And we need to be prepared for that. Absolutely. We need to be as prepared as possible for that. But before it escalates to that, I just would hope that we would do everything we can. And again, when I say sanctions on steroids, I'm talking about if we have to, we just stop trading with China altogether.
Right.
Forget it, because you know what? It's going to cost them more than it's going to cost us.
They cannot afford it right now because they're overly dependent on the U.S. market. And if we were to deny that market to China, or even some Chinese enterprises, that could very well be the trigger for the loss of confidence in China. In 2015, 2016, there was massive capital outflow. The only reason why it's down this year is because of draconian capital controls, making China look like a banana republic. They cannot afford to do that. So we've got the upper hand.
We do. And let's not forget it. Thank you so much, Gordon Chang. Good to see you.
Sanctions. These U.S. Treasury satellite images show what South Korea suspects is a Chinese ship transferring oil to a North Korean ship in international waters. The Chinese today strongly denying the government was involved, hours after this accusation from the president. Quote, oil is going into North Korea, so I'm not happy about it. Lago. It's where a day earlier, for the first time, he explicitly acknowledged he's been soft on China on trade in that impromptu interview with the New York Times. His administration hoping Beijing will pressure North Korea to end its nuclear weapons program. Now, new concerns China's actually helping the rogue regime and violating UN interview.
Have you seen in the last week, couple of weeks, a change in tone when it comes to the special counsel Russia investigation?
I think he's always had a lot of respect for Mueller as an individual.
He not once, not twice, but 16 times insisted there was no collusion between his campaign and Russia and doesn't want the investigation to drag on. Up the end of 2017.
It's an honor to have you at the course.
The president hosting the Coast Guard at his golf club near Mar-a-Lago. The 30-minute interview shattered what had been the relative quiet of the president's working holiday as he decried the Russia investigation, but not the man overseeing it, Robert Mueller. I think that he's going to be fair, the president said. That's different from the questions of credibility some other Republicans have raised. Chris Ruddy, the president's friend, joined him for part of that interview.